Hi everyone, welcome to the latest ANTA webinar, Clinical Practice Prescribing, Getting It Right. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for today. My name is Danielle, I'm a nutritionist and member engagement lead at ANTA and your host. And I'm really excited to be joined by ANTA's Ingestive Therapies National Branch Chairs, Esther Parker, Warren Maginn and Mark Shoring. Esther is our ANTA National Naturopathy Chair, Warren is the ANTA National Clinical Nutrition Chair, and Mark is the ANTA National Multi-Modality Chair. Before we begin, I would just like to run through some quick housekeeping with you all. As this is an interactive webinar, please feel free to add your questions into the chat bar for the team to answer throughout, with time permitting. And this webinar is recorded today on the traditional land of the Kabi Kabi people and the Jinnibara peoples of Sunshine Coast Country. ANTA acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. And we pay our respects to elders past and present. Today's roundtable discussion is based on practitioner application of the ANTA Clinical Practice Prescribing Guidelines, for which you will find a copy in the chat today, as well as in your member portal. These guidelines aim to provide further clarity for achieving safe, effective and legally compliant prescribing within broader clinical practice for the protection of patients and consumers, as well as the limitation of health practitioner liability risks. They have been developed to support practitioners to apply safe and legally compliant prescribing practices, understanding scope of practice in alignment with professional guidelines, navigate therapeutic goods regulations, learn about compounding exceptions, understand the provision of practitioner-only supplements within practice, and distinguish between nutritionists and herbalists prescribing practices. Thank you also to those members who have submitted their questions ahead of today's webinar for discussion. And without further ado, we will open the floor to question one. Okay. Mark, would you like to start with answering question one for us? So we have overseas clients have limited access to TGA approved supplements. Similarly, clients often self-prescribe supplements that they've bought online from overseas, for example, iHerb, as we know, as a main online distributor of supplements. Firstly, how should practitioners list non-TGA approved supplements on their prescriptions? And is there correct wording or terminology that practitioners should use here?
So in this case, it's about, and I'm assuming you can all hear me because you're all shaking your head, so that's good. I think it's important to obviously follow the rules and regulations for the jurisdiction with which the patient is living. So in my experience in the past, I've had some patients all around the world. They've been, in some cases, in the US on the PGA tour. And they needed to comply with FDA rules and regulations in that particular case. And on the golf tour, they didn't allow TGA supplements. They wouldn't allow them. They had to be FDA specific because it was in America. So you do have to comply with, obviously, the rules and regulations of the jurisdiction with which you're actually providing services into in that particular case. And you also need to be aware of the rules and regulations about what you can and can't prescribe into the area with which you're prescribing. So what we might do here in Australia or what people might do in the US are very different. And in the US, you can prescribe hormones, where here in Australia, you can't. So in other jurisdictions, like if you were over in the United Arab Emirates, some things that we do are scheduled S4, so, or doctor only. So you need to be aware of those sort of limitations and requirements as well. So if you are delivering into these other areas, it does require a little bit more, but certainly in Australia, because it's as a general rule, most of our practitioners are in Australia, we're complying with TGA in this particular circumstance.
Great, thank you, Mark. Warren or Esther, would you like to add any more to this question?
Sure. Esther, do you have anything to add before I?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to add that for Australian, as Mark says, being Australian practitioners and being therefore under the TGA here, there is an exception provision that patients themselves as citizens are entitled to source and import a certain amount of supplements for their own use that are non-TGA registered. They can get up to about 3 months supply for their own personal and family use, not for distribution, obviously. and they do so at their own risk in a way. As long as it's not a controlled substance, they have a certain amount of freedom there. The issue for us as practitioners is, as is sometimes quite rightly pointed out, you're taking complex case studies, you're looking at all their prescribed supplements and medicines. You really do need to do your diligence on all the cross polypharmacy that might occur and the interactions. And so definitely note everything that they're on in your files. But if you'd like to note that something was of their own volition and sourced themselves and wasn't recommended by you, that's very important to do. There isn't standard language to do that as long as you make it clear what your recommendations were. So it's fine that you capture that they're taking it, as long as when it comes to the part of your notes that says what you've recommended doesn't include it, because your recommendation would be considered an advice for a non-TGA supplement. And that's how you factor in their choices without it straying into your recommendations.
Wonderful. Thank you for that clarity. Warren, Esther, do you have anything else to note there?
No, just I guess reiterating the importance of keeping your case taking, remembering that it's a legal document all the time, and that keeping that patient-friendly language as well. So just ensuring that, patient is not taking my prescription, is taking their own, so just keeping it all very professional and remembering that it's a legal document, then you're pretty well protected.
Yeah, great point. Wonderful. So move on to question 2. So before I jump into question 2, I have a little bit of a poll for everyone attending. So I've just opened that poll, and feel free to jump in, have a look at that question and put your answer there in terms of yes or no, relating to the image on the page here. So question 2, can practitioners mention or publicly share certain industry brands on their social media? And what are the advertising guidelines for practitioners around this? Esther, might you like to jump in here?
No, it is quite topical, actually. We've been speaking to a few practitioners about it, and it's certainly something that's coming up a lot now with social media, and that being a really big and valuable part of people's business, I think, and not discounting that kind of marketing. So we just have to be really careful that your support for a product or support for a company doesn't become endorsement. So we need to be really clear on how we are displaying what we do as a craft in a very visual world of advertising and marketing, so that we're not putting ourselves in a sort of precarious position. So in terms of, can we mention or publicly share certain industry brands? You can't share, I wish I had a bottle to show you, I should have had some props. We can't share a bottle of a product, name and particularly sort of say we're using this for this health condition, but a scenario where you're in a clinic environment and things are around you, that would be fine. So we have to be very careful that we're not promoting or talking about a product in that way, because a lot of our practitioner products, our practitioner only products, do need to be kept away from the public eye, as most of you would know, and in pharmacy and in health food stores, they're behind the counter or behind a door, or they have to be prescribed by a practitioner. So do be very careful, I suppose, in what you're advertising online. But I'm happy for Warren and Mark to jump on that as well.
Thank you.
Mark, do you have something you'd like to add? I'll go after you.
Just really important not to endorse. Endorsement is the issue. So as health practitioners, you shouldn't be endorsing things or gaining any sort of outcome that is to your benefit out of endorsing something. So I would suggest to all of you, when doing this, when I put this picture up, am I endorsing something? And am I actually giving my professional ethics a situation where I'm actually saying that this is the best product? And if so, that's wrong and you shouldn't do that. So I don't know, maybe do a pub test before you go with whatever photos you put up online. And if you're putting something up and it's clearly definable what something is, like the picture on the screen, we all know what those bottles are. I can see MediHerb and Bioceuticals up on that shelf. That would indicate that that's a form of endorsement, and that would not be the best photo to put up online.
Thank you, Mark. Just an update, as some of the results are coming through before you jump in there, Warren. I can see so far that around 70% are saying that yes, it is compliant with advertising guidelines. So around 30% are saying no at this point.
I've been watching that too, Danielle, and I've noticed that as we progress in talking, the no is creeping up. So yeah, I'll add some extra thoughts here. The thing that the TGA is most concerned about here is context. What they don't want to see is that you are directly or indirectly endorsing and promoting a specific product over others. So if you're holding the product, they even specifically say if the brand is visible and you aren't even saying anything about the product, that's considered endorsement and advertising. That's actually in the letter of their wording. But there is a room for gray area, since it's such an industry standard to have our dispensaries visible behind us. If, let's say, it's your bio page and I'm a practitioner and it's you at your desk, we know that often happens. But perhaps if it's blurry, you can't quite see and it's in the background, maybe there's some acceptable context there. It's unclear. Obviously, the ideal would be to not show brands at all. The real thing you just need to be mindful of, and in this image's particular case, the fact that she's interacting with the products and the products are the focal point of the picture probably starts to stray into that endorsement aspect. So yeah, it's a gray area, but we would probably encourage people avoided the visibility of brands because they are considered endorsement. And I guess following from that, it's worth pointing out that the TGA has all these requirements for us as practitioners. They don't quite have the same requirements for laypersons who aren't qualified practitioners. And that applies even if you retire. So if you were ever a practitioner, these rules will always apply to you, because it's considered that later on you might moonlight as a consultant or as an expert in the field, and your reputation has already got weight above and beyond what the average person might share with their experiences. So it is very serious. They are very prescriptive, and they are policing it more and more. I'm privy to certain meetings where they're really trying to bring the hammer down on that. But it's a bit of a whack-a-mole with how much activity is on social media. So don't learn from your peers. We're giving you these guidelines and see if we can raise a better standard for ANTA members.
Wonderful. Thank you, Warren. And can I also ask on that, someone has just put a really valid question. Mark, jump in.
I was going to say, I've been looking at the questions coming through, and obviously they're coming up. What can we do? What can't we do?
Yeah.
You know, if you're still wanting to do some promotion online, perhaps looking at the herb itself and putting it there, because that's not a brand, or food, not a brand, as long as it's not got packaging on it. These are things that you could do. You could put powders down, but then of course powders can lead to other things as well. Like people can misconceive what a powder might actually be. So it's about how you re-look at things and sort of maybe rather than putting brands out there, looking at other ways of actually showing it. Perhaps if the liquid tincture was in the bottle without the actual brand of the MediHerb, and you actually just had the cylinder with the herbs in it, that would be okay because you don't see the MediHerb bottles in the background. So think outside the square there rather than actually showing the brands themselves. I think that goes back to Warren's point, and I'll let Warren give a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's just like in films, how you'll see de-identified brands or water bottles with no label on them. They have to follow the same kind of guidelines in film and TV. And so it's very much worth remembering that as a practitioner, you are promoting you and your services, not necessarily the products that you provide, because it's your expertise that may or may not make that particular product applicable and suitable for the person who ends up coming to see you. And that's why the TGA has that rule.
And on that, do not put the patient's name on the bottle when you're actually doing it. You got to scrub any personal details on any form of advertising material as well. Otherwise, you're breaching that patient's privacy. And I can tell you, we've had a number of ethics issues regarding that. So please, no personal details of this is John Smith and this is the formula. Just remove John Smith's name from it. That would be ideal. Esther, do you have anything, or Warren, you have got anything else to add on that?
Esther?
No, I think they're great ideas. We've even workshopped some how-tos, to think about maybe some ways that some do's rather than some don'ts, some social media examples of where people are really getting it right, just to give everybody a bit of a visual idea. So, I guess if that's something everyone will be interested in, we could develop something like that, maybe put it up in a blog or an email, just to show you some examples of where you can do it, because we don't want you to not advertise yourselves. It's just doing it in a way that keeps your business safe.
I just noticed another question come through, Danielle, if you wouldn't mind me jumping on that.
Absolutely, Warren.
Jessica's?
Yes, Jessica's in relation to personally developed product. And I'm sure many people sometimes wonder this, and I guess this gets into compounding, which we can talk about more in a moment. But just to jump on that, if you develop something yourself, if by that you mean a bespoke made compounded medicine, you do need to note that the provisions for that legally prevents and prohibits you from promoting that for everyone. That is supposed to be something you make custom there and then after a consultation for a specific individual. If you have a favorite formula you lean on, that's fine, but you still can't make batches of it in the basement and start distributing it. If you're saying you worked with a company to make a finished product and you actually are a seller of a finished product, the rules are actually even more strict for you because you are not supposed to promote that through your own personal interest in that way, just as you would as a practitioner. So unfortunately, in both instances, that isn't something you're free to do. And so when you say public use, maybe there's some clarity needed there.
Even further on that, if you've created a product and you're selling that to the general public, it has to be TGA approved.
Yes.
And so that then means you've got to go through the TGA approval process at that point. So extemporaneous compounding is only ever after the consultation. If it's before the consultation, then you need to get that product TGA approved, and that's going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars to get that up and going. And then you're going to have it manufactured, and there's a whole audit trail that goes with that. So saying necessarily it's a bad idea to generate and create your own business line components, you can absolutely do that, but you can't do it without TGA approval.
Yeah.
Unless the only time it changes is if you are extemporaneously compounding, and that is after the consultation. So you take a consultation, you do a bespoke product or therapy for a patient, which could be a herbal or a nutritional. You make it up for them and it's specific for them. And each time they come back to you, you'll change it around. That's perfectly fine.
So if Jessica's clarifying that it's a branded supplement, what Mark is saying that it would need to be Austell registered so that it's got a TGA license to be made. And then the fact you were involved in developing it probably makes it even more strict, not less so, that you have to abide by what we just said about not endorsing brands publicly, unfortunately. We understand that this is a central part of your business, and this isn't something we take lightly in promoting more caution here. It's just legally become a very strict area under the TGA, and in Australia, it might be unlike the rest of the world. So on social media, you won't see a lot of good examples, and we do need to refrain from that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Warren. Thank you, Mark and Esther. This has brought up some great discussion. One point I did want to ask, I can see a question here. What about non-practitioner brands and essentially supplements that are considered foods, for example? And how does this change for non-practitioners, particularly in this online space of influencers? And I could probably speak to maybe what this member is referring to, for example, protein powders. Where does this apply in terms of practitioners advertising those or speaking to those on their social media?
So on this note, everyone jump in if you've got something to add, but just quickly, because I know that when we wrote the initial guideline document, this came back as a question. And I wanted to clarify that the prescribing guidelines document is very much targeted at therapeutic products and therefore are under the purview of the TGA. A food is by default not supposed to be a therapeutic product. We use food as medicine, but in the way that we promote it, we have to be careful about making health claims. There are a restricted set of approved health claims that can go with certain foods like inflammation and fish oil and a few very small exceptions that FSANS does allow. But in general, you'd still want to be careful not to be promoting a therapeutic benefit, which you as a practitioner would be doing by spruiking a brand. And that's where it still kicks in. So Mark, you go.
To add to that, certainly for registered practitioners, if you're doing an endorsement as a registered practitioner and somebody complains, then the registration board can come after you. So particularly if they've got issue with something that you've actually endorsed. So it's not just necessarily the TGA that can come after you. Certainly as a registered acupuncturist and Chinese herbalist, I also have to be careful from a registration perspective. The general public can see what you're promoting, and this could be on Instagram or whatever, they can make a complaint against you to the registration board, and you can get approached that way as well. So you do need to be cautious, because you can't have your profession held to a poor standard. You have to maintain professional ethics and the like. And these type of rulings are starting to creep into non-registered health professions through some of the state-based bodies that look after non-registered health professionals, like the Office of the Health Ombudsman and the like here in Queensland, certainly. Somebody can make a complaint there, and they can say, what would an average health professional do? And you need to be cautious of that as well. And that's outside of the TGA, just to add on to what Warren said.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Warren. Particularly as well, Mark, making mention to registered practitioners. As we know, there's a whole other set of guidelines there in terms of your advertising as well.
Just to clarify quickly, Danielle, before we move on, it's totally fine to use foods in your prescriptions. All of this is just about advertising. Privately in your scripts, if you think there's a therapeutic benefit, there's no restraint there at all. Yeah.
Great. This has brought up a lot of discussion, but we will move on to the next question. But thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions so far, and we will aim to get to them throughout, if not after. Okay. So question 3, some powdered liquid food products fall under the category of foods, for example, through Food Standards Australia and New Zealand. So if these products do not have Austell or R numbers, how can practitioners determine if they are well formulated and safe to prescribe? It's kind of actually speaking to what we've just touched on.
Yes.
Esther, Warren, Mark, do you have anything else to add to this question specifically?
No, I was essentially answering that question. So
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's been answered. I think it's just making sure that you're applying everything you normally would as a practitioner. Let's say you learn of a new company or you learn of a new product. You're going to research into it. You're going to look into how they produce that product, where the ingredients are coming from. Hopefully you're pushing back on your reps and pushing back on the company to say, I'd like to see the toxicity data, or I'd like to see, the sourcing. No, you're not going to get all the information of where they source their ingredients, but you should get a percentage of how much of those ingredients might be Australian based, or, so just do the same with foods, be critical. And if it's something that you're going to be putting into your script, it should be something you're really comfortable prescribing.
Great. Thank you, Esther. And I think that speaks to scope of practice as well, which we've made a point of definitely including in these prescribing guidelines. So that's always something to come back to in terms of your comfort as a practitioner and what your scope of practice is. I've seen a question come through I'd like to pose to the directors. So TGA has added warnings for example, liver products such as turmeric. Do these warning statements need to be labelled on compounded versions of these products?
I can jump in there. So when it comes to the TGA guidelines, it's worth reminding ourselves that even though there are practitioner-only products out there, the TGA considers all Austell products retail, and therefore need to be labelled for a layperson buying them off a shelf. That's why those warnings are required. When you're making something bespoke yourself as a practitioner, the understanding, actually the provision requires that you are giving the necessary consultation advice behind the scenes. So it might not be required on the label, but any risks and considerations to be factored in with a certain medicine you're dispensing would have to have been conveyed to that patient in the course of the consultation. Maybe that's on your prescription or notes you give them, or whatever you converse in verbally during the consultation, but definitely document it if there are any risks or risks of contraindications to consider, because that will be your legal backing. If there is ending up to be an issue, you want to prove that you made that clear. And that's how you obtain informed consent. So that's a basic practice guideline, not so much to do with TGA products.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you for that clarification, Warren. I can also see a question coming through that it is one that has been raised a number of times within ANTA from our members. And Esther, this might be relevant for you. In terms of having teas or creams, so therapeutically developed teas and creams made to sell at, for example, if practitioners are going to markets with their business name on that, what are the guidelines and regulations around this?
Yeah, I was reading this question as well, because I was thinking to myself that I always assumed that was fine, but it's also just occurred to me that maybe we need to be a little clearer in our guidelines about the boundaries around that, I suppose. And it is an ingestible too. I mean, a cream is a topical, and it is, a sort of not a standardized product. It's not being made in a factory, but it has a compounded element to it because you are making it yourself with your own knowledge, and you do have that education background. So there is a bit of understanding there that you're applying all of that knowledge and research. But the tea, I've always thought that was absolutely fine, but I'm actually might lean on you guys. Yeah, Mark's already saying he'll put his 2 cents in here.
Don't make a therapeutic claim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's say it's a tea and this is what's in the tea. Do not make a therapeutic claim. The minute you make a therapeutic claim, it becomes TGA approvable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Don't make a therapeutic claim. Be careful what you call the product. Don't make it sleepy time tea.
That's right.
Even the labeling.
Even if a nice exercise to do is just to go and look at any product with an Austell number anywhere. Practitioner only obviously is even less information because they're assuming we know what they're for. But if you go to any pharmacy, any supermarket, anywhere and have a look at what's on there, even if you look at that product and you go, oh, well, this is a cardiovascular product, there'll be nothing on there that says anything to do with helping with a disease. It will always be general heart health. It will be for a healthy heart. So it's surprising how much marketing can happen in your brain subconsciously just by having a picture of a cartoon heart on the front. So having a picture of a smiley face on your tea might make people think it's good for stress or good for good for your nervous system, but you definitely can't write anything on there about treating anxiety or helping with sleep, as Mark said. So yes, it's maybe a nice exercise to do is go and have a look at some of the products out there and see what they're allowed to say, because there's a lot you can infer, but you definitely can't name any conditions.
Great, thank you, Esther. Okay, we'll move on to question 4. So question 4 is, considering nutritionists who have completed a Bachelor in Health Science and Nutrition, can you provide guidance on how many herbal medicine units or courses they would need to complete to formulate herbal tinctures?
Okay, speaking from nutrition here quickly, and I guess Esther and Mark can add, the guidelines were written to clarify some of the nuances of how a nutrition practitioner can use certain nutrition-based food substances that might also correlate with botanical ingredients, and there's a bit of overlap there. And most of that related to whether there was instructions on a TGA product that were approved by the TGA, and if you stayed within them, a nutritionist could talk about certain herbal ingredients inside there if they were just recommending the product as a whole and not straying from those TGA approved claims, because that's a retail product. The right to do anything more really means speaking to some other use or quantity or dose or something that is not on the label, and that can only be done by a qualified practitioner. And so in that, the qualification has to be obtained. There isn't a set number of how much learning you could go and do years of learning. If you haven't got a qualification to earn you that and recognition under the association, you can't go that extra step. And so the course criteria that ANTA has for accepting those qualifications would then kick in, and it's a bit of a complex field, but just look up which courses would be recognized by ANTA to ensure you would secure that for yourself. Otherwise, don't stray from what the TJ label says.
Thank you, Warren. Mark or Esther, do you have anything to add to this question?
I just say I'm multi-modality branch, so I'm a herbalist, I'm all acupuncturist, naturopath, nutritionist. I've got qualifications in all those things. So I would strongly recommend that you get an actual qualification in herbal medicine, if that's what you're looking for in this case, which is what Warren was saying, and that we approve that, because it's about scope of practice and it's about your insurance, and it's never a problem until it's a problem. Mm-hmm. In other words, if a patient has an adverse outcome and there is a claim against you, it's going to be, is that your scope of practice? And that's where the issue comes up. So it has to be within your scope of practice. And if you're really wanting to go down that line, I would strongly recommend some form of herbal qualification, because it's going to cover you if anything bad ever happens.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. And my only point would be, as a lecturer for a long time and as a chronic person with a study problem, I understand that we're asking a lot of you to say that, you know, that you've been a nutritionist. In this example, you're a nutritionist, you're passionate about herbs. We're asking you to go and get another degree. I get that that's a really big ask, but it's exactly to what Mark and Warren are saying. It's for your safety. It's for the client's safety. It's not worth doing all of that study and then have something go wrong, and it's your business, your reputation. You know, it's just not worth it. So the answer is really you can't really provide the guidance until the end of that qualification, and then we can add it to your membership.
Yeah, all great points. And I think this is, I'd like to probably mention here something in terms of the importance of referring and having that ecosystem of multimodality practitioners. So if you are a nutritionist and you do see the benefit for your patient to potentially have someone guide them in terms of taking herbs or taking a specific herbal tincture, really lean on those connections and that system that you've developed for referrals. I think we're in the industry where we're all here to support each other, and we all know we have our expertise in whatever modality we're practicing in. Okay, question 5. This is quite similar to this one. So as a qualified clinical nutritionist looking to study naturopathy, are you able to prescribe herbal supplements towards the end of your naturopathy training? So this is if someone is on the way to become a naturopath prior to being officially qualified. Anyone?
I want to start, Esther, and I can elaborate.
Yes. No, I'd say if you're in student clinic, because if you're looking to be a naturopath, then you'll be back in, again, I know I'm breaking some hearts here, but you'll be back in clinical practice for clinical practicum for universities. So yes, in there you will be under the guidance of your supervisors, but no, from our perspective, you certainly wouldn't be prescribing herbs or herbal supplements until you have that qualification.
Thank you, Esther.
Yeah, just to add to that, there is some provisions within certain companies, let's say prac-only companies, that will allow access in your final year for personal use to experiment with things, and sometimes that extends to family. Just be careful with that. Obviously, the risks still exist, even because you know someone. But that is something you do see talked about as a somewhat exception, if that's what led to the question.
Great. I can see a question come through, which is quite interesting. If you work, so for example, if you're a nutritionist working with naturopaths in clinic, can they have a say for your client cases, and how would you write that in your notes?
So this is really co-prescribing, right? Working together as a team. Yeah, I'd love to hear Mark and Esther's thoughts on this, but just quickly, you need to document everything you contribute to the treatment of someone and your liabilities. So I wouldn't do it off the cuff. I would have formal prescriptions and guidelines around how you each document the case and your contributions to the case, noted by name at the very least. But there is also patient privacy aspects to consider about which information was divulged to make those decisions from. If you're going to say, hey, I'm going to go to my peers and tell them everything about your case, have you got all the necessary consents for that? So there's something at the front end and there's a responsibility at the back end, but lots of detail we could explore here. So I'll hand it over to Esther and Mark.
Thank you.
No, I feel the same. I was just going to say consent is going to be a big, if that's the way your practice works and there's a team approach, which is fantastic, then there needs to be systems in place, you know, because you probably need to go back to that naturopath as well to talk about how that herb has been going, or how, you know, so as the naturopath in that situation, I generally want to either see the client or certainly spend a lot more time on the case before I put my name to something that I'm going to give the client, particularly if I don't know what else they're taking and medication. I might want to have a touch point with the client as well. So it really depends on the clinic, but all of the points that Warren was saying.
Yeah,
Mark,
great.
do you maybe want to talk about the contract and file ownership side we've been seeing lately?
Yeah, I was contemplating that here. Obviously, in this question from Zoe, she's sort of inferring that the clinic owns the notes. And obviously, all practitioners should be aware that when they sign a contract to go to a clinic, that patient notes may not necessarily be owned by the practitioner, but by the practice itself. And we've seen this come through several of our ethics queries that over the last 6 months. So if they are owned by obviously the clinic, then the clinic would own that. I would suggest also look at your privacy intake policies and procedures for your clinic as well. So they should also indicate that everybody in the clinic, so this is a patient file of the clinic, and anybody who works at the clinic has access to those files, and the patient should be aware of that from the outset. So if there is ever a complaint later on, that's actually covered off in the privacy content that the patient fills out, or if they haven't filled one out, you have actually got some privacy data that you're now getting out to your clinics to make sure that you're defining who has access to those patient notes and what access they are, because technically the patient also owns the patient notes. And I agree with Esther 100% that if you're prescribing something, you need to be 100% confident in what you're prescribing is right, and that there is no chance of adverse effects from other medications they could be on. It's very easy for a patient to come to a clinic and say, nothing's changed, and then you sit them down and go, oh, but I was put on Vivance by my practitioner, my GP and psychiatrist for ADHD, and you're like going, hang on, that completely changes my whole scripting in this particular case, which is a form of dexamphetamine. So I would strongly recommend that you see the patient and have a consultation before prescribing anything there. I think that answers the question, doesn't it? But yeah, look at the privacy details and look at who, if you are signing a contract to work at a clinic, look at who owns the clinic records, so that at the end of the time, you're not having an uncomfortable conversation thinking you own the patient notes and you don't own the patient notes, they're owned by the clinic.
Great points, Mark. Have we got anything else to add to that point? Otherwise, I have got a few questions that are coming through that we can definitely have a look at and discuss. So one that I have noticed, a few people have asked this in terms of clients that are then taking photos of, for example, products or supplements that the practitioner has prescribed and sharing them on social media. Where is that, I guess, where are the guidelines for practitioners in that? Obviously, we can't control what the patient goes away and does. Is there an issue though, for example, I can think if that patient is, for example, tagging you as the business name in that, is there an issue there?
So I'll just add a quick comment here that the main issue the TGA has is with anything that is in your control. If it's on your wall, if it's in your website, that anything you could take down, you should take down. If you can't, and it's done by someone else like Google reviews, it's understood that that's out of your hands, as long as it wasn't implied that you had requested. You know, some people might say, for an endorsement or a testimonial, I'll give you a discount or something. As long as you were never seen to be doing that, that would be a big issue. They are still subject to the regulations. They can't even give testimonials if they took money or payment for things. So there are things they're subject to, but if it's out of your hands, at least you're not liable.
Great, thank you, Warren. Esther and Mark, do you have anything else to add to that?
Even from a registration perspective, it's the same thing, because you're not allowed to use testimonials as a registered health practitioner. So as a result, if you have control over it, you're in trouble if it gets reported. But if it's out of your control and it can't, and when I say out of your control, it's again, like Warren said, you haven't offered any form of endorsement to the patient to put something up. If they've just put it up themselves and that's out of your control, then in that particular case, that would be your defense. But yeah, I'm always cautious around social media.
Yeah.
I think that's the motto of the day, really, that what we see out there is obviously quite cavalier, and that if you really read the law, there's a lot of things that are done every day that shouldn't be done, and that if we're aspiring to the best standard and to protect ourselves as well as ANTA, de-identifying things, sticking to everything, being very ethical and private is the safest way to go. The more you're sharing patient data, the more you're promoting products, the more things are visible, the more risks come in, and you're going to have to be more careful.
Yeah. Great points. And pertaining to that, in terms of social media and how we use it as practitioners, even sharing, commenting or liking these posts by our patients, would that be considered an endorsement?
Yes.
Yes.
Because it's in your control.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Warren.
I see Diana has a question about, do you need to give client consent when going over de-identified cases? Again, go back to your privacy policy of what you actually did originally. obviously, if you've got access to the notes, they are your notes. You can go over it. You can de-identify. Please don't put notes up online. I say that again. It's not a good idea. It's not something you should put up on Instagram. Just please don't do it.
And that's also lab test results. Mm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you both. Okay. So we've gotten to the end of our questions. I'll just invite all of our attendees today, if they want to submit any other questions while we've got a little bit of time up our sleeve, please do in the chat box. One thing I did want to touch on as well, which is relevant to our prescribing guidelines, is the uses of title. And I guess this is something that for particularly unregistered practitioners, so naturopaths, nutritionists in the space, in terms of what we can call ourselves and the use of our title, what are the guidelines and what control, again, do we have there? Warren, Esther, Mark.
Why don't you start, Warren, with like ANTA approved?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thing.
Accredited.
Start with that.
Yeah, so it's something we'll make more of a fuss about this year, but for your awareness, in case you weren't already aware as a member, that you do have the right to refer to yourself as an accredited ANTA X. That might be natural therapist generically, but it can also be your specific modality if you are recognized in that modality. So in my case, be clinical nutritionist or naturopath in Esther's sense. And you can refer to that on your bio page. You can say that is your title. You are accredited by ANTA. We do recognize you if you're a current member. There will be some ideas on how to present that visually with the ANTA logo and whatnot soon. But in general, that's a nice way of distinguishing yourself from other practitioners that may not have raised themselves to that bar. And so that's probably the closest thing you have as a non-registered professional to a protection of that amount of title. In terms of, in my case, as nutritionists, just generically, who can call themselves a nutritionist, unfortunately, it's not regulated at all. And I know everyone will know quite intimately the issues with that we face. I'm sure the others face it in their fields as well. So I'll hand over to Esther and Mark.
I would say I'm going to approach this a little bit differently beyond what you've said, Warren, because that's obviously from the ANTA thing. From the registration body perspective, you need to be very clear on not using a protected title. So everybody talks about registration. Not a lot of people actually understand what actually registration is. There can be registration of practice or there can be registration of title. The bulk of practices in Australia are registration of title, which means you cannot use a protected title. This probably goes more for the naturopaths and herbalists. You need to make sure that you do not infer in any way, shape or form that you are a Chinese herbalist or you're doing Chinese herbalism. That could be inferred that you're a Chinese herbalist, because the registration board has and will come after you and fine you for that. So you can call yourself a herbalist, just don't infer that you're a Chinese herbalist. That's one that I think, unless you are a Chinese herbalist and you are registered. So just keep that in mind. I've seen it on more than one occasion with people outside of ANTA who have been done up for that, and it's not a good situation to find yourself in. So yeah, if that comes in more, so if naturopathy or Western herbal medicine or nutrition was ever became a registered health profession, there'd be a series of titles that will be registered. And it won't be over practice, it'll be over registration of title, which is what everybody else pretty much has at the moment. And those protected titles, only people who are on the register will be able to use those. There may be an exclusion list that certain people can actually use that. I know for acupuncture, there are some exclusions for people in osteopathy, chiro, and medicine, that they can use the title of acupuncturist. There's exclusions there, but if you use the term acupuncturist and you're not on the register and you're not one of those dedicated professions that's been excluded, then they will come after you again. So I guess that's the best I can sort of say from a registered perspective. Esther?
Yeah, I absolutely, and I can't speak as clearly as you can to that side, so that's awesome. I think there's maybe a tiny bit of the question that I can still answer, which is maybe the difference between nutritionist and clinical nutritionist, naturopath, clinical naturopath. Maybe people are starting to see these terms a bit more. There are different ways to be a naturopath or a nutritionist, and maybe you're not working with clients at the moment. Maybe you're working in the lab side or product development or rep, or you're writing or developing recipes, or who knows. So maybe in those scenarios you won't be using the clinical aspect, but maybe to differentiate yourself in clinic and you are client facing, the clinical word might be something you want to add to your practice as well, just to help educate. I wrote down here education because it's one of our tenets of holistic therapies, is educating the client and educating the general public. And by using the phrase like ANTA accredited naturopath nutritionist, or using clinical nutritionist or clinical naturopath, you're actually educating the public to think a little bit more deeply about who they're choosing for their health. And I tell people all the time, it doesn't matter who you're seeing. It's okay for you to check up on their credentials, and you should be checking up on their current association membership in whatever practice you're seeing as a member of the general public. So you guys have done the effort. You guys have bothered to do the training and have an association membership and insurance. You should be really proud of that and lean on that, and don't feel bad in educating others about that as well. And it's something I think we want to do at ANTA, is just spend a bit of time trying to support you guys and letting the general public know that this is, as we're currently not registered, this is how they can find reputable trades to treat them safely.
We should have probably clarified here that in this context, registered meant APRA registered versus the unregistered professions like nutrition and naturopathy in that context. Obviously, you can be registered with any number of other bodies, but they're not government bodies. So this was government registration. And I'll just add to what you were saying there, Esther, in the sense that if someone, because I think it gets asked a lot, if someone is trained as a naturopath, you refer to yourself as a naturopath. If you're a nutritionist, you refer to, whatever your qualification is your title and what you are registered to be under ANTA. So if you've got ANTA membership, that's something you can call yourself. If you happen to do a lot of nutrition and you understand nutrition, but your qualification is naturopath, you aren't a nutritionist, you're a naturopath. I hope that clarifies that.
Yeah. Great point, Warren, and thank you, Esther and Mark, for those clarifications. It can be quite a grey area, particularly for unregistered practitioners, as we're speaking to, and it does speak to, as you made a point there, Warren, referring to your title in terms of what you have been trained to do. So someone has said, does this mean that naturopaths can call themselves nutritionists even if they didn't complete a nutrition degree? And I think that's what you were referring to there. So I think that's a really important distinction. Great.
Yeah, I was trying to refer to that actual query earlier with Linda. I don't know whether you can see my response answers that were specific to Linda, but I sort of said, we answered this previously. It's a situation where ideally you have a qualification as a nutritionist to call yourself a nutritionist. As a naturopath, you can do nutrition and just say that rather than say, I'm also a nutritionist, because you should actually have the parchment to actually use that. As somebody who has lots of parchment, I strongly recommend that you have the parchment when you make those decisions.
Great point, Mark. And yes, you do have many parchments, that's for sure.
Yes, I do.
Okay. As we've got about 5 minutes left, I'll just once again invite the attendees with any other questions. But if there's any that have come through, directors, that you'd like to jump on or speak to, please do in this time.
I guess it'd be worth just checking if anyone feels that their question hasn't been answered and they want to upvote it for us with the last minutes we have.
Great.
Not to mention, I think if we have a bit of time after this talk, this is recorded, so we can go through and collate some of these questions, and we just may have missed them today, but don't think that they'll be unanswered. We can certainly get to them. I think maybe Danielle, if they look like they're a bit important.
Absolutely. There's been some great discussion and great questions come through, and we've definitely tried our best to cover them today. But as Esther said, I'll make sure that I capture all of them and we can respond to these following the webinar today. And of course, for anyone watching the replay, please also send those through to the team, and we will get to them as soon as we can. Okay. Someone's, yeah, sorry.
I was just going to add one thing I see from Chloe, just about labeling guidelines. If you're using, if you're doing compounding and you're going to label things yourself, there is a series of requirements you should include on the labels you provide. I've put out some training on compounding that covers that in detail because there is a bit to it. So I would encourage anyone who's unsure of what they should be putting on all of that to really look into it and make sure they're giving a thorough amount of information. I know that something some people do is they will sell a raw unit of compound onto their patients. That's okay to do if you've gone and applied some kind of label and guidance around how to use it, not just selling it as if it's a finished unit.
Thank you, Warren. Okay, Heidi, it would be great to hear advice on information on adverse reaction as per Chloe's question. So that was what you just covered. Thank you, Warren.
Warren just said too, that goes for the herbalist too. Please write your herbs on herbal bottles, like what's in the actual prescription. I still see prescriptions come into me. A patient throws it in my face and goes, I've got this from my naturopath. I'm working as an acupuncturist in this particular capacity. And they go, what do you think of it? And I look at the bottle and it says herbal tincture. And it's got nothing that's in it. And I'm like shaking my head going, I don't know even what's in this bottle to be able to give you any advice on whether it's good, bad, or whatever. So please write what's in it. If they present to an emergency department, they need to know what they're taking.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a step before that, the herbies and the naturopaths in the room, just as a general reminder to keep all of the, not this doesn't need to go on the bottle, but your own information for batch numbers and expiries. So for again, adverse reactions, if it not coming back to you, not a problem with you, but potentially a problem with the herb, or if there's been a recall of that herb, you need to be able to go back and flick through your notes and check that you have those, that you can double cross-check those batch numbers, you know, were not involved in that recall. Or so, yeah, I think the labeling is one side, and then your own note-taking. I'm sure everyone's doing it, but just while we're on the topic, it's always good to mention. Maybe it's been a while since we've studied and remembered to do that.
Thank you, Esther. Yeah.
How are we going for time? There's a few questions I can jump on there, Danielle.
Yeah, please do, Warren.
I've just noticed a couple come in. Just one about proprietary blends. I see this all the time, and that's an American convention. It is not legal in Australia to call something a proprietary blend. I have a TGA consultant that sometimes refers to this to me as America's secret squirrel business, and they say Australia is not allowed to do that. We have to disclose, so as Mark said, people can see what they're taking. The commercial interest doesn't trump the individual private interest in this country, and I think that's a good thing. So definitely write everything out. You will have to disclose that in your compounds, and you will have to do that obviously as a TGA product. So there's no context with which someone can take something in Australia and not know what's in it.
Great point. Thank you.
Even from a measuring, if you want to go from a registration perspective again, Chinese herbalists must write what's actually in a herbal prescription that they're dispensing, whether that be raw herb or whether that be powders or whatever. If you compound it, it has to write what it is, how much it is, because there was a question about, do you have to disclose the input amounts? Yes, you have to disclose the input amounts, how much you put in it as well. And you need to say how they've got to take the dosage, obviously. It all needs to, and any recommendations on how that needs to be prepared. So if it's a raw herb formula that has to be boiled for 20 to 30 minutes, and then it should be cooled. Don't drink it hot, because people sometimes do things without actually thinking about what that means. So boil the herbs, allow that to cool, and then drink the substance, and you should have X amount. That all needs to be written on the bottle, and it needs to be very clear. If anything goes wrong through the process, you've provided excellent advice across the board on what to do, and that's clear on the bottle in this particular case. So yeah, you do need to say how much you've put in and what those things are. Certainly the Chinese herbalist, and my gut feeling would be, if a health ombudsman had a complaint about a non-registered health professional, they'd look at what the registered health professionals generally tend to do, and given that Chinese herbalists need to do it, I would almost guarantee that they come back and go, that's weird that they don't write what's in their formula on the bottle. So I strongly urge you, if you're not doing it, please do, and save yourself a lot of headache.
Thank you, Mark. I think anything that Mark suggests you strongly urges you to do, you definitely should be doing. We can all take that away from today. So is there anything else, Warren, Esther, Mark, that you'd like to touch on before we wrap up?
Just as Esther said, if there's anything we've missed or things that occur to people afterwards, to keep sending it through. It's always an open dialogue. We'll address it as we can by email. And thank you for everyone's engagement with these important issues.
Absolutely. Really grateful for your interest. Just really great turnout, but obviously an area that you guys are feeling the need to know more about. So, very grateful you put some time aside in the middle of your day for this as well. So thank you guys too.
Yeah.
And if you have any other ideas on things that you'd like to have us do as a Q&A, please let us know. We may not be able to do everything, but if enough people say something they're really keen to hear a bit more on something, and we get like a number of our members saying the same thing, we'd like to do those things and provide you with that advice and help and support. So please do let us know if there's anything else we can do.
Absolutely.
Or you want stuff like this.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. And that's exactly right. We really do appreciate our members' feedback, and also for all of you here today being live with us, being engaging, having some great discussions and conversations. We really appreciate it. And I want to really take this moment to thank our wonderful branch chair directors, Esther, Mark, and Warren. It's been such an insightful and very informative presentation, and one that I know our members will take a lot of valuable insights from today. So I want to thank you all for giving up some of your time and expertise. And it's something where ANTA really endeavours to support our ANTA member practitioners to really achieve their highest level of clinical success. And we want to do that and support that through adhering to best practices and the regulatory requirements. So thank you for all of your expertise and advice today. Just a reminder for everyone that's attended, you will receive a CPD certificate in your inbox. So log this as some of your CPD for the year. And also finally, I'm really excited to announce that ANTA will be holding its inaugural symposium on the 10th and 11th of October this year on the beautiful Sunshine Coast. I've attached a link in this chat for you to register your interest if you haven't already, and to be one of the first to be notified for the early bird ticket releases. And so, of course, being ANTA members, you do definitely get a discount for those tickets. So we really do appreciate all of your attendance today, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next ANTA webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thanks
Thank
Danielle.
you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.